Three, two, one. John Mossman, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Glad to do it.
So I feel like there's a bunch of things that we could start off talking about, but I want to know what really your family business is and how you started to do that.
Okay. My wife and I run an executive recruiting firm, and we have a specialized niche. We only work with companies that manufacture food or food ingredients. And we place candidates that are in a technical capacity of some sort, scientists, engineers. We place operations management people from mostly like plant manager and above. And then we also place executives. I've placed some CEOs. And really sort of fell into that business a long time ago. I was out of college a few years and was looking to make a career change, and I saw this ad that was just really, it was a little vague, but it caught my attention.
Sure.
And I went and interviewed, and it turned out that it was a recruiting firm. And maybe later I can explain a little more about what that means, because not everybody is familiar with that.
Sure.
But at any rate, after a number of interviews, I got hired there. And at that time, I was working in a different specialty niche with chemical engineers. And a few years after I had been there, that they hired Maureen, who ultimately became my wife. So we first met by working together.
Really?
So we've always worked
cool.
together. That's the only relationship we've ever known.
Sure.
So then when, we ultimately dated a while and got married and started a family, and, trying to do the commute and daycare and everything doesn't really work out that well.
Sure.
So Maureen actually started the business at home in a little room a little bit bigger than this table. And a few months later, I quit and came home, and we've been working together since. That was in 1990.
Okay.
So
you guys have been at this for 30 years.
Yeah.
What about the recruiting business do you feel like you and your wife have figured out to be able to do it for this long? What skills do you need to be a recruiter?
Well, you kind of have to be a detective. You have to be a psychologist.
Sure. You got to know people.
You have to be a salesman. It's all of those skills. I mean, honestly, first of all, when I first started in the business, I didn't really completely realize I was going to be a salesman, because I never really thought about a career in sales.
Sure.
But after a while, it became pretty crystal clear that clearly I was in a sales business. And, the kinds of people that we place are college-educated professionals. Most of them are married with a family. They own a house. And the reason all that stuff matters is that very often, most of the placements that we make require relocation.
Okay.
The food industry is very widespread. We work nationwide, and have all along.
Due to the position that your people are getting, it would require them to...
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the kind of, when you're a vice president of operations for a food manufacturer, you don't just walk down the street and get a new job unless
Right.
you happen to be somewhere like Chicago.
Okay.
Or, in the sort of New York, New Jersey area, there's a lot of food companies. But particularly if these jobs are at food plants, they tend to be in rural or more rural areas. But at any rate, getting back to my point, that this is a huge decision for people. And
Sure.
so it's a very, very complicated transaction. So that's why there's so much psychology and what have you involved. And really what we're basically in the business of is helping people realize what they really want and help them get it. Both the companies and the individuals, because there's never a perfect match.
Sure.
There's always some sort of compromise, and you got to help people get through all of that.
Yeah. Have you seen, in the past 30 years, have you seen it change based on really how you approach it, or have you seen the people that you're dealing with change even in their mentality of jobs?
The only constant in life is change.
Yeah, right. You got that right, man.
And yeah, our business has changed immensely. I mean, when I first started in the recruiting business, and it would have been 1983, we didn't even have a fax machine, you know. Everything that we did was on the telephone. You know, there was no internet.
Right.
So
you're not making Zoom calls.
Yeah. You know, all of the research that we did was, you know, in books. It was very, very different. So the whole business has evolved in a lot of ways. And just the whole mentality. I can't begin to list the ways it's changed, honestly. But yet at the same time, it always comes back to the people. So how we do what we do is drastically different than when I first started.
Okay.
But the essence of it is still understanding people and, you know, putting together the right matches.
Right. That's wild. You had said that you've placed some CEOs. How does that happen? How do you get... How do you get to that point? Because that's wild.
You do this for 30 years.
You do. You build a name for yourself.
Well, but more importantly, you know, people that I placed as, you know, a production supervisor 25 years ago, as they progress and I stay in touch with them, now they're CEOs.
Right.
But then, you know, not all of it happens that way. I guess a few years ago, it became pretty crystal clear to me that, you know, whether you're the janitor or you're the CEO, you put your pants on like at the time.
Sure.
You know, people are people. And what's really interesting is that, you know, I keep saying this all comes back to people. The reason that guys and women get to be CEOs is because they're good with people.
Right.
And I have found that most of them are more approachable than, you know, like a lot of the scientists that we work with. You know, we place people that do, you know, that have advanced degrees in food science, that do quality control or do product development or research weird ingredients, you know, that stuff on the label that you can't read. You know, and those people have got a whole different mentality. You know, they're more about things than they are about people.
Do they see the industry differently?
Well, they see the world differently.
Sure.
You know, so I guess my point in all of that is that the CEOs are generally more approachable, you know, and so you can build relationships with them.
Yeah. Do you see? You know, have you and Maureen seen? From doing this in the 80s and 90s, have you seen a difference in young professionals today as opposed to young professionals back then?
Oh, yeah.
What are some of those differences? This is the stuff that I love to talk about because someone like you, I think, would have a great insight into this.
Well, you know, it's really interesting because there's a lot of talk out there, you know, among human resource professionals, which I guess we're sort of a part of. The millennial thing, you know. But I guess one of the things that we've really seen over time is that there isn't the sense of loyalty, of permanence, of commitment. Both sides of the equation. Again, you know, right now, nobody thinks beyond 5 years. That's the planning horizon. When companies used to be looking for, you know, somebody that they would hire and keep forever. And if people had more than a couple jobs on their resume, they were labeled a job hopper. And, you know, it was really hard to place them. And honestly, if somebody, you know, when I first started, we hardly ever placed anybody over the age of 45.
Really?
Because if they weren't established somewhere by then, there was something's wrong. Right? And now we get the opposite. You know, if somebody's been with a company for 10, 15 years and hasn't been consistently advancing, they figure there's something wrong with them. You know, people your age in their careers, most of them will have multiple jobs.
Sure.
You know, and it's like the magic window is 3 to 5 years. You know, you got to stick around 3 years or you're a job hopper. But if you're not moving up by 5 years, you better move out.
Then you're not motivated or something. Right. Man, you know, it's interesting. I see a lot of college students, they'll graduate. And then in that first 6 months, maybe they get that job right out of graduation.
Right.
6 months later, they just don't like it. So they say, okay, we'll quit and we'll go on to the next thing. Do you get a lot of people that are like, hey, I've been working for 6 months, just wasn't working out, so I need you to help me?
that's happened forever. I'll tell you how that happens. I've seen this over and over. This is why small companies avoid hiring fresh grads. They let the big companies do it, because what happens is they come from the incubator world of college and they get a job, and they find out that it's hard, and they think it must be the job. So they quit and get a new job. And then they find out that it's still hard. And somewhere they realize that's why they call it work. They used to call them first bouncers. That's what happened. It's just part of the maturing process.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, you see that, even 30 years ago, we saw that. Mm-hmm. It's just a part of the whole growing up process. They when they find out that you actually have to show up every day and you can't cut class, and you can't show up hungover, whatever. You got to you're getting paid. You got to do a job.
Right.
Many of them think that they must have picked the wrong job because it's hard. And, then they get another job and it's still hard, and it kind of sinks in, and then they settle in.
Sure. I'm only 28. So it seems like so many college students nowadays, they might pick their major that they stick with at their junior or sometimes even senior year. It seems like there's this lack of direction a lot of times with younger people. Being in the business that you are, have you seen that change? Like, for people that are in the food industry long term, did they want to do this going into college and saying, I'm going to get my degree in X and then I'm going to go to recruiter Mossman and they're going to point me in the right direction? Or are you finding people that later on in their college career or later on in life, they say, you know what, let's try the food industry out?
Honestly, I see both.
Okay.
But it also it kind of depends. In the technical part of it, you pretty much have to have made a decision and got the right education and gotten into the business. But if you're in more operations or marketing or sales or other kinds of things, yeah, you absolutely can do that. I guess that would be really the big difference.
Sure.
And one of the things that we see is that, like I was saying before, the food companies might not always be where somebody thinks they want to live. And that often ends up limiting people's careers because, they grew up near Hershey. They went to college. They got a degree in food science. They went to work at Hershey. Well, if you don't want to move from Hershey, there's not too many other games in town. Right. I mean, there are a few other, there's a number of snack food companies right in that area. But I mean, basically, as soon as you limit yourself geographically, you've limited your career.
Right.
If you've chosen an industry like the food industry. Now, and then one of the things that people get confused with is that we don't do anything with food service. With restaurants and that kind of. The only exception to that is that some of the really biggies, McDonald's, Wendy's, they have their own R&D staff, just as if they were manufacturing the food themselves, and they have significant influence and control over all of their suppliers. Whoever makes hamburger patties for McDonald's makes them exactly as McDonald's tells them. Sure. They don't have any latitude, so they've got, when Wendy's comes out with a new sandwich, some food person that works in their R&D department came up with that and then went to all the suppliers to get all the right, parts to make that sandwich.
Sure. So you just kind of said something that wants me to ask this question. Do you have a lot of competition in what you do? Like, are recruiters really well known or well established as you are? Are you competing with people in the Western PA area often?
Again, I got to circle back that, we're nationwide, so where we're located isn't really an issue.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, in our specific niche, we know, most of the
there's players.
Legitimate, competition. But it's a huge industry. I mean, I don't even know the current numbers anymore, but it's probably got to be at least a $10 billion industry.
My goodness.
And
there's a slice for everybody.
Yeah, right. And most people that are in the business have done something to establish a niche. Some people. There are several recruiters that only work in the greater Pittsburgh area.
Okay.
They work on a much wider range of types of jobs, but their whole network is just around Pittsburgh, and most of them will tend to work on a little bit lower level jobs. So how much we get paid is based on how much the candidates get paid. So, if you're working on a position that pays $300,000 a year, the fee is, 3 times that of a position that pays $100,000 a year. So it's just it's a whole different setup, at the level we work, the whole process takes longer. There's more involved to getting where you get. But I guess to try and specifically answer your question, a lot of people come and go in this business. There's a very low barrier to entry. And if you are established in a particular industry, like a lot of guys that are executives in the food industry will become a recruiter because they've got a network.
Interesting, yeah.
But they don't really know how to do our job. They just know some people.
Sure.
As soon as they exhaust their network, then they're done. So you might be around for a year or two.
Like you were saying too, you have to be a salesman, a psychologist, a people person. You have to wear all these hats to be able to be successful in this.
Long term, yeah, absolutely.
That's interesting.
So a lot of people come and go. And especially in the last, 15 years or more, with the explosion of all the technology and ways to communicate and everything, it's becoming more and more of a cottage industry. It used to be there were a few really big players that everybody knew that did all of the high level executive stuff. It's not so much like that anymore. But then a lot of these people, they've got a computer and a telephone on a desk at their house, and they're kind of living from placement to placement. And when times get tough, they disappear.
Right.
That's the other piece of it. I mean, there's been a couple times we thought this year was going to be one of them because of COVID, but actually it's has not affected the food industry terribly.
Really?
There were some headlines, because of some of the meat packing plants that had significant outbreaks of the COVID.
Sure.
But that was because they were in a perfect environment,
Right.
Cold, damp, a lot of people in close proximity. It was almost a given that they would have outbreaks.
Sure.
But in terms of the industry, I mean, one of the reasons that we chose the niche we did is that people got to eat.
People got to eat, man.
Right. So things change as the economy changes. And even now, there's much more emphasis on natural products, and young people are much more concerned about, how was that cow raised, and, what did it eat, and, what was its name? And, it's like, they want to know about their food.
Right. But with that, it seems like almost all, you would know better than I, but a majority, I would say, of these industries or these companies that deal with food have at least had to head that direction or have some sort of option that is clean or that is pure when it comes to their food.
Yep. Oh yeah, absolutely. It's driving everything. And some of them have handled it mostly through marketing.
Really?
Oh yeah. You'll see stuff like, there's some product that will say gluten-free. And it's orange juice. It never had gluten in it, It's like, of course it's gluten-free. It never had gluten in it.
But we can slap that on there and charge an extra $1.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And obviously that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek example, but there are loads of them out there, You go read some of the labels and you're going, sugar-free. Of course, it never had sugar in it, But it's a marketing thing,
Yeah, that's interesting. That's so interesting. So you've kind of touched on a couple things. The way that you're able to stay in business is you get your people good jobs that pay well. So you desire to have quality people, especially going into interviews. So do you guys also, in a way, prep for interviews? Do you give hints or do you give tips or advice into, listen, this is how you approach this question. This is how you make eye contact, whatever that might be. Do you guys also develop people that way?
Absolutely. One thing that's important to understand is that the companies are our customer. The
Gotcha.
fees are paid by the companies.
Okay.
They're the customer.
They're seeking you out for high quality people.
Right.
I gotcha.
And because we're in a time, even in spite of the pandemic, we've had record low unemployment until this whole thing hit, and it's coming back rapidly. Most of the people that we place are what we call passive candidates, which means they're currently employed somewhere, reasonably happily employed, but open to a better opportunity.
Okay.
And they're not answering ads. They're not surfing Career Builder or, whatever. But if someone like us approaches them with the right opportunity, then they'll listen.
Right.
So that requires us approaching them and finding all about what they're about. But to get back to your original question, we prep both sides. Because one of the things I figured out a long time ago is that I can't make someone into something they're not.
Okay.
And I can't make a company have, the right position or the right culture or whatever. But I can make sure they focus on the right stuff. And that's what I do, so that when they do get to the interview, that the interview is productive. So we try to help people make sure that they're putting their best foot forward and that they're talking about the stuff that's important. But before we got to that point, we already figured out with them what was important to them, and so we're really helping people get what they really want. The problem with all of that is that often people don't really know what they want.
Okay. What do you mean specifically?
Well, this is my favorite example of what I'm talking about, and I'll ask you this question and then we'll go from there. You go down to Home Depot, and you're looking for somebody to help you, and you tell them that you need a 1/2-inch drill bit. Do you, in fact, need a 1/2-inch drill bit?
Do I need one? Yes.
Okay. Why?
To work on projects.
Because you need a 1/2-inch hole.
Because I need a 1/2-inch hole. Yeah.
That's what you need, a 1/2-inch hole.
Okay.
So here's the deal. That guy gives you a wood bit and you come home to drill a hole in a cement wall in your garage and put up a shelf. It's a disaster. Right? So if he doesn't say, what are you drilling? He doesn't give you what are you drilling into? He doesn't give you the right tool.
Right.
See, you came in there thinking you needed a 1/2-inch drill bit. You didn't. I got a whole drawer full of drill bits. I don't need a single one.
Right.
Unless I need a hole. So that's my point. So people often think I need, the company says I need this degree or I need this person to know this specific thing.
Okay.
Well, okay, why? And that's often how we're able to make the matches. Companies are struggling to find the right person because they're not looking for the right person. They're looking for the right resume. That it's taking it beyond what's on the resume that really makes the difference in our business. Which
goes back to what you were saying. You have to know people. You have to know people. That's so interesting. What is it in doing this for 30 plus years, 30, 40 years? What is there a thing or a couple things that people do that they shouldn't in the interview process that you're like, listen, just don't even go there. Like, this will help you if you avoid at all costs. And obviously, I don't want to, you don't have to give away your business here. But
well, I mean, one of two things happens. Either people assume that the other person knows more than they know, or they just ramble on and talk way too much. And so that's a big piece of it. How do you handle salary in the interview is always a big question. Most people will handle that poorly.
Okay.
why are you looking to make a job change right now? People handle that poorly because they talk about the boss they hate and, all this other negative stuff instead of talking about what they want.
Right.
Why are you here for this interview? Is it to get away from this, boss you don't like, or is it because you think we're a good place to work? So it's stuff like that.
Right. That's interesting. And in your company, between, you and your wife, you guys have employees as well?
Yeah, we have a few.
Do you guys handle, is there one of you that handles directly with your people more, or directly with the companies more? What exactly would be your position?
Well,
what is Maureen's position?
That's kind of evolved over time. So right now, the 3 employees that we have are all support staff in some way.
Okay.
The one does a lot of the administrative stuff, and kind of keeps track of all of the information in our database. And we have a huge database of companies and individuals. We have one person who does most of the sourcing of candidates, scouring on the internet and
Sure.
looking in trade journals and all sorts of things, to find the right candidates. Mm-hmm. And then one person does all of our social media exposure. And then Maureen and I primarily work, once we've identified a candidate and at least kind of gotten through the basics with McKendra, our research assistant, then one of us will take it from there. And pretty much Maureen and I handle all of the client companies.
Gotcha.
But then the other thing is that in the last few years, I've sort of been migrating, and I'm working more in the area of mergers and acquisitions. So I've developed relationships with a number of companies that are looking to buy other companies.
Okay.
So now instead of matching people and companies, I'm matching companies and companies. So that's been fun.
could you explain a little bit into that? Because that's pretty unique.
Well, actually, you'd be surprised. But generally speaking, I tried to develop relationships with the ownership of multi-generational family-owned companies that are at a point where they're looking for an exit strategy.
Okay.
And then, again, it's the same thing. I work under what's called a buy-side agreement. So a number of the companies that I work with are large private equity firms, although some of them are larger operating companies as mm-hmm. well. And I basically, if you're trying to sell your company, you're not like telling everybody. It's a very, it's
especially if it's been in the family for years too.
Well, but if you're currently employed and you're looking for a new job, you're really careful who you tell that to, right?
Sure.
Because you don't want to get fired.
Exactly.
Well, if you own a company and you're looking to sell, you want to keep that pretty close to the vest.
You want to keep your customers.
Your customers, your vendors, your employees. Right. You don't want the competition to know. There's all kinds of stuff. So I really have to, more so than ever in making placements, you have to earn the trust and get them to start telling you stuff. Even to the point that I usually have to sign a non-disclosure agreement so that they'll start telling me more details about their business so that I have enough to go and represent them.
Right.
And I'm not like a licensed business broker. I really just bring the parties together and facilitate conversation.
And do you bring that together at the company that's purchasing? At that company, is this in a courtroom?
No. It's exactly like what I do. It's like I've got relationship with these people, and if I, there's a big private equity firm that I work with in Chicago, and let's just say the guy's name is Joe. If I just either send him an email or call him and say, mm-hmm. Hey, Joe, I became aware of a company that I think you guys would be really interested in. Let's have a conversation. And, he'll call me back and I'll give him the basics. But again, I've had enough conversations with him. These companies usually have sort of specific targets.
You know what he
They're
wants.
looking for companies of a certain size.
Gotcha.
And a certain type. Whether they're stuff in the center of the store, or frozen food, or some kind of specific ingredient, or something like that. I have one client that owns several spice companies. A couple years ago, I facilitated the sale of a pet treat company. So when I call, first of all, they know that this is not going to be a waste of their time.
Right.
They might not, it might not be the right company at the right time, but they're like, okay, this isn't some schmo from left field who's going to try and, sell me a Rita's franchise.
Sure. You're not trying to snake oil anybody.
Well, but not even that. They know that it's worth talking to me.
Okay. Now, where is the interest here? Is the interest from a larger firm to maybe buy up a company to cancel the competition? Is this to buy up a smaller company to try to improve it, to try to grow it, or is there an end game in sight where it's like we can now use this strategically to help X, Y, and Z over here? There
are different strategies, obviously, but usually the way it usually works, but particularly within the private equity world, they'll buy a company that they will refer to as a platform company. Let's say that they make spices. Now, and maybe they'll pay $100 million for that company. One of the strategies to further grow that business is to go and buy 3 or 4 $20, $30 million companies that have synergies with that one and pull all that together to make a bigger entity. And on the seller side of it, usually it's a situation where either there's no clear progression plan. It's for a business to get beyond the third generation of family ownership is a huge hurdle.
Really?
For a lot of reasons. You're at a point where there's a lot of dilution of the family. You got great grandkids at that point, all of whom kind of want to have a piece of the pie. And if there isn't somebody clearly stepping up that's going to run the company, then you got to do something.
Yeah.
But the other thing is that very often what will happen is that first generation starts the business, second generation just inherits it because first generation ran the business till they died.
And they probably had that second generation working that business since they were a kid.
Exactly.
It's like, well, we're not just going to stop this.
Yeah, right. So, so now you've got adult children that are 30, 40 years old that know the business and can run it.
Right.
Well, now they have children, but they're like 20, and they're getting to be 65 or something, and they don't want to work the rest of their life. They want to retire. Well, they can't afford to give the business away because that's their retirement. And the children can't afford to buy it because they don't have any money yet. So they've got a problem. So somehow, some way they got to go get money. And one of the ways that they do it is just to sell. And sometimes it's not a total sale. Sometimes it's they'll sell 40% of the company for an influx of capital to do what they need to do. Or sometimes it's just, okay, we're at a point where we got to either grow a whole lot or not grow at all because, we need some big capital investment to take this to the next level. So that might be a reason that they're looking to sell.
I'm sure too, if that, if grandson or granddaughter, whoever, isn't really a visionary as well, it's going to be tough to make that decision. So you kind of come in at a vulnerable point to say, listen, you need some direction.
Right.
You need help. You need some wisdom here.
Right.
And that's kind of your role, is to point them in a good decision-making position.
Right. And and if ultimately you come to the point that they say, it's time to sell, I've learned enough about them that I know how to represent them, and I have some ideas of who might be interested in buying them. We're working with a company right now that, for obvious reasons, has to be unnamed, but we've done business with them for, close to 30 years, and we know the owner personally. And, we've placed lots of people at that company. And he's exactly at that point right now. His kids, he's got one or two of them that have interest in being involved with the business. But they're still young. They have young children themselves. They're probably not quite ready to actually be the CEO, running the company completely, and they're certainly not in a position to buy dad out. So that's what they're looking to do.
Yeah. What do you do?
Well, and often a part of the deal is that certain employees are retained for X amount of time, but also in many of these situations, part of the deal is that the CEO is going to stay for a transition period, whether that's a year or 2 or 3. Usually 3 years is too much, and a year may not be enough. But so
there's that
that's
sweet
often
spot.
Often that's a part of the deal as well. They kind of work through the transition. So you go from being the CEO of your own company to working for somebody else. It's got to be the right match, or it's not going to go very well. So so that's the way that I've transitioned into that whole piece of it.
Yeah. Do you see yourself doing that? Is that kind of, you're going to take on more of that role?
Yeah, I'm still working with some of our some of the clients, and I still recruit on some of the positions that I have particular knowledge of. It's like, Maureen is really good with the technical positions. For some reason, she manages to communicate with those people. I do more of the operations stuff. And because my early background was in engineering, I do, when we have like engineering and maintenance management type roles, I tend to handle those as well. But the whole merger and acquisition piece of it is something I'll probably just keep doing like forever.
I was going to say, you could do that pretty much as long as you wanted to do it.
Right.
You have those relationships, that trust, and that credibility. You could just continue to do that.
Yeah, and it's fun.
I'm sure it is. Brokering businesses, and not just business deals, but businesses will be pretty sweet.
Yeah, well, and because basically, if I have a tablet or a laptop and a phone and an internet connection, I can do my job.
Is it weird going from going from people's salaries to, and visually seeing that on the books, to what they're making, to, obviously you don't have to give us numbers, but to then the numbers becoming a business, like seeing that you're scaling up like crazy, right? So you're going from individual salaries to entire companies being bought and sold. Like, do you see it differently?
Just more zeros.
Right, it's just more zeros. Because at the end of the day, you're still trying to build relationships and make connections and point people in the right direction.
Yep. Yeah. It's just an interesting study, because in a lot of cases with, like these scientists that are making $75,000 a year or $100,000 a year maybe, and that's interesting. I mean, the salaries have gone up like crazy in 30 years.
Yeah?
Oh, in 30 years? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, in 30 years I can see it for sure.
Oh yeah, but by normal inflation and everything. But
sure.
One of the things that happens is in the world of human resources, recruiting is always given to the new young people. Why they do that, I have no idea.
Okay.
So you got somebody who's 3 or 4 or 5 years out of college making $50,000-$60,000 a year, trying to help them hire somebody who's making 3 times that.
Yeah,
who's got 3 times that much experience.
Why do they? It doesn't. Why are companies trying to do this? Is it like to show young blood, to have a face to it? Or?
No, because it's tedious, you know. And on the company side of it, especially if they use us. Mm-hmm. We don't bring them tons of candidates. We bring them a few that are all really qualified, and they go through the process. So this HR person is basically just arranging phone calls and interviews and, booking hotel rooms, stuff like that.
Right.
But what ends up being a problem is that I think that one of the things we keep trying to instill in our client companies is that whoever is looking to hire that candidate is the one who should be driving the search, because nobody knows better what they want than they do.
Right.
Nobody should be more motivated to get the position filled than they are. That's the way it should handle it.
Right.
And okay, so if somebody in HR has to, schedule the interviews and book the hotel room, great. Here's my candidate. Here's when they're coming. Get them a hotel room. These are the people I need on the interview list. Make sure that they're all available and put it together.
Right.
But don't be driving the search.
Sure.
And it's when they let those other people drive the search that it's a problem.
Sure.
And sometimes it's because, somebody higher up in HR is trying to, maintain their turf, and they tell them that it has to be done that way. But sometimes it's because the manager really isn't that motivated.
Okay. I'm almost feeling like too, if you're a candidate, you have some like 25-year-old kid calling you to say, all right, this is what we're going to do. And somewhere in your head, you're kind of like, well, wait a minute.
Yeah. But the thing is that it's so common that people are used to it. They're
okay.
like, whatever.
So you guys are kind of out of the norm at this point, even though you've been doing it so long.
Well, no, don't misunderstand. We provide a service.
Right.
I mean, basically, people think that we provide candidates. I don't make these candidates, I just find them.
You're making the match.
Right. So we provide a service of identifying candidates, bringing them to the party. One of the things, we talked earlier, you asked me about what's changed. One of the things that's changed dramatically is that it's way easier to identify qualified people than it ever was.
Why is that?
Well, things like LinkedIn.
Okay, yeah.
People put so much information on their websites and all kind. I mean, it's easier than ever to identify. Okay, this is a person who has the skill set, but it's harder than ever to actually get them to respond to us and to get them to the job. Where it used to be that, if a recruiter found you, you were flattered and you would call them back. Now they're like, whatever, like I might have to call them, email them, text them 6-7 times until they say, I guess this person's serious. And then they talk to me.
What on earth?
This
is their job, though. You'd think that, it'd be different, but kind of getting to what, again, that psychology behind millennials and the generation before millennials. It's
right.
just, you're right. It's just different.
Yeah, it's very different. So, I guess I'm trying to bring this around back to the point. Our business is everything that it takes from the time that person was identified as a candidate and from the time that this company over here realized that they had a need and we got it defined till the person's actually on the job.
Yeah.
That's where we earn our living, know. And the other thing is that there's just a lot of sort of interesting taboos. Companies are hesitant to contact a passive candidate directly. And candidates sometimes are reluctant as well because they're concerned about, sort of the confidentiality, the anonymity.
Sure.
Because you never know, who's really calling you. So that's where, that's another place where we come in, because we're a neutral third party.
Right. That's cool. And again, doing this for 30, 40 years, do you, obviously with the acquisition of businesses is more what you do now, do you have a vision for your company? Do you have a vision for what 10 years from now you'd like to see it be, or is there anything new that you guys are going to be taking on?
Well, we do a lot of other stuff.
I'm sure we could talk about 4 hours here today.
Well,
we won't, but
we are involved with rental real estate and some other things as well. One of the things about sort of the nature of our business is that unless you have grown a really big recruiting firm, like a Heidrick and Struggles or, Korn Ferry or some of those really big recruiting firms, you might not know those names, but, they're like global players that have lots of employees. Our company the value is us.
Yeah.
You know, we really don't have a whole lot to sell. So that's why we've done other things to build, you know, assets.
Sure.
So realistically, you know, none of our kids have really shown interest in being involved with the business. They're all doing their own thing. And that's fine. So for us, it's at some point, you just kind of just stop doing it. You know?
Right.
But again, it's the kind of thing that we can do less.
Yeah.
But, you know, you just kind of back away. But that's the other thing with, you know, with doing more of these mergers and acquisitions. There's a lot of hurry up and wait in that thing. You know, some of these transactions will take 2 years or more from first conversations till actually, you know, closing the deal and somebody sends me a check.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so there's a lot of waiting in between.
Right.
You know, so I can wait on the beach as well as I can wait in Butler.
That's a good thing, man. That's cool.
You know, so yeah, as far as our, you know, if you're asking me like, what's our exit strategy? Kind of just ride off into the sunset, I guess.
Dude, hey, isn't that the best way sometimes, though?
I mean, it'd be nice if the business had transferable value. And I mean, small recruiting firms do get sold, but it's usually like, you know, for 1 year's worth of income or something like that. Because, you know, that our name means something, you know, our relationships mean something, but it doesn't take long before, well, you know, what happened to John? What happened to Maureen?
Right. It means something kind of as long as you're attached to it.
Right.
Yeah, I gotcha.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, if you did want to sell, you're the guy for the job to sell your business.
I suppose.
Well, hey, let me end with this question, just because I'm curious. What's the best part about what you do, from your perspective?
Well, the paycheck's kind of nice. I mean, you know, we've made a good living doing it, so that's, you know, there's no question about that. But honestly, recognizing that, you know, that we do stuff that changes people's lives.
Yeah.
You know, and it's interesting because sometimes, a lot of times we feel like people are totally ungrateful. You know, that you find them a great job and it's everything they want, and you know, by next week you're old news. But there are people that we've kept relationships with, and you know, it wasn't too long ago that someone that Maureen had placed years ago and has moved on since. It's like, you know what? I just need to thank you. That was the best thing that ever happened when that, you know, 10 years ago when that happened.
Yeah,
you know,
that's cool.
that changed my whole career. It changed my whole life. You know, so
that's sweet.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah. I feel like even, you know, you're making an impact not on the individual but their family as well. You're helping that family get through a tough time of trying to find, you know, the breadwinner trying to find a job maybe, or you're helping that family just in years to come. So that's cool. It's
usually one of the biggest decisions in their life.
Yeah.
It's bigger than getting married because it's beyond just a spouse. It's kids, and it's beyond just buying a house. It's certainly beyond like buying a car. You know, it could affect where kids end up going to college. I mean, there are so many aspects of the decision. It's huge. Yeah. You know, and helping people work through all of that is really, really important.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. And you know what? It's cool just even sitting here talking to you, your heart behind it, your expertise behind it, and the fact that you enjoy doing this and you continue to do it when it seems like you could scale back, but you can still do it. So why not do it? That's really cool. So
I don't see myself kicking back and playing golf.
Right.
That's
cool. Well, hey, where can people find you? Where can people find what it is you do? Website, social media?
Yeah, I'm sure you guys can post all that when you put this up. But you know, it's our company's called MK and Associates. The website is mkandassoc.com. I'm on LinkedIn, so if you just go on LinkedIn and find my profile, you'll find me. I guess one thing I will say to any of my friends or family that might listen to this. If you're not in the food industry, I probably won't connect with you on LinkedIn. I try to keep that, you know, pretty much in my market niche.
Yeah.
Glad to talk with you on Facebook or somewhere else, but not LinkedIn.
That's awesome. John, thanks so much for coming in, man. We really appreciate it.
All right. My pleasure.
Thank you.